Everybody hear me all right if I'm just without the microphone?
Yep.
Perfect. I did have,
Only because Mike's on.
is it carrying over? If we just leave it, that's fine.
Yeah, we can just leave that.
Can't hear it with that off.
I did have a PowerPoint slideshow ready to go, but it was all pictures of the build out that we did at the brewery, but unfortunately technology got in the way, so I don't have that with me today, but that's all right. I guess you'll just have to come to the brewery and I'll show you what it looks like in there. So my name is Seth Barrows. I'm the owner, brewer, janitor, electrician. I do everything at Farm Road Brewing. I do have one other full-time employee, and she has saved my life because she takes a lot off of me. But I pretty much do it all there as the owner. So, and I brew part-time. So that's how that goes. I grew up here in Southern Vermont. I grew up in Dorset, Manchester area, and moved to Arlington about 7 years ago. And then instead of doing our shopping and everything else in Manchester, we started coming to Bennington. And I fell in love with it down here. I'm here today. I actually stood up Congressman Peter Welch, and I came here instead. I was going to make a politician joke, but I won't.
Actually, I left him because I knew you were talking.
Actually, I did, in my time in the military, we call them dog and pony shows with politicians, generals, and I did so many of those that when they asked me to do that this morning, I said, now that I don't have to do them anymore, I'm not going to do it. So that's kind of why I gave up on that one. Like I said, I grew up in Dorset, Manchester, and I'll go through kind of my past life and what brought me to opening a business and being a brewer, what got me to Bennington, and it's my past that sort of brought me in this direction. Growing up and in high school, I knew I wanted to fly airplanes. I knew I wanted to be in the military to fly airplanes. So I started focusing on that. I went to Maine Maritime Academy through Navy ROTC there and was commissioned in 1994 in the Navy, and then went on to flight school after that. I went in as a naval flight officer, navigator, and I did 9 years in the Navy, 2 cruises on 2 different aircraft carriers over to the Persian Gulf, which I guess we don't call it that anymore, but and then 9 years of that, 9 years of moving around, and I discovered the Air National Guard over in New York, which is a way to still serve in the military, still serve part-time, still fly, but not have to move every 3 years. So and it also brought me back here to Southern Vermont where I wanted to be. So I did 18 years there. Our job over there was, we have C-130 airplanes that have large skis on the bottom. We're the only ones in the world that have them. And our job is to fly supply missions up in Greenland and also down in Antarctica as well. So I did that for 18 years, and also interspersed in there, I did a couple of tours over to Afghanistan as well on the C-130. So I've literally been to every continent in the world. So while I was serving in the Air National Guard full time, and I started to come up on my 27 years. I did 27 total, but I started to come up on where I could retire. I started thinking, what is it that I wanted to do after I retired? And I really had no idea. But I did know that I wanted to start my own business. I wanted to be my own boss. So part of being, and this kind of jump back, in the military, you hear this phrase all the time, I can't believe they are making us go do this mission. Why do they think this mission, is so important? Why do they think we need to do this? And I thought to myself, well, who's they? And then I decided, in order to stop, complaining about that and to fix that, the idea is, well, to become they, or to become one of them. And I did that by, down in Antarctica, we have we have 200 of us down there and 7 airplanes and a whole group up in New Zealand as well. And part of that job is you need a commander to run all of that. So for 7 years, I went down there and I was them. I was that guy. And I took that experience from the 15 years prior of, complaining about all the dumb decisions that were made. And I thought, well, I'm not going to make those dumb decisions. And I think I was about 90% successful. So in that, I realized I could be one of them, but then I realized in the military, there's always going to be a they or a boss above you. even if you get all the way to the top, your boss is the president. And I realized so I can never not have a boss. So how do I not have a boss? I start my own business and I be the boss, and I don't have anybody else except maybe the tax man, that's my boss. Or the customers, if you want to look at it that way. And then but I didn't know what I wanted that business to be. And then I started homebrewing about 7 years ago, and I absolutely hooked. And I looked at my wife and I said, I think we should start a brewery. And to her credit, she went, okay, instead of saying, are you nuts? So that started, just plans in the head and reading as much as I could, and about business and just brewing in general and the business of brewing. And then I realized that I didn't know what I didn't know. So I went to the American Brewers Guild, which is up in Middlebury. It's a 6-month school. It's all home done, and then you spend a week up there at the American Brewers Guild, run by Steve Parks, who in the brewing world, he's up here in the brewing world. Everybody knows who Steve Parks is if you're in that world. So not to brag, but I did graduate from that program and actually realized that I didn't know what I didn't know. So it was well worth my time, and it took me into that. I graduated there in 2017. And then we moved forward. We started looking at it. We started timing out, where I could be at retirement, and then when to get the brewery rolling. I wanted to get the brewery rolling while I was still getting paid in the military and still had time. So I signed the lease on the corner spot in Bennington in February of 2020, which I don't think I could have timed it any better. So we signed the lease. We started getting the financing together. And luckily I had a contractor who's a good friend of mine, and he said, you just tell me when you're ready and I'll put you at the top of my list, no matter what I've got going on. So I had all that lined up, and then COVID started rolling in March, and I really think I was very, very, very lucky in that I was about a month ahead of the curve. I think if I had been a month to 2 months later, I wouldn't be standing here talking to you. Because I just happened to be ahead enough of everything, and especially when it comes to the financing and when it comes to the banks. I was able to get the financing before we all realized that this isn't going to be over by the end of the summer. We're going to be in this for a while. So I got very lucky there, and it also, I hate to say it helped me a little bit because now we had the time. Nothing was open. I actually didn't have to go to work every day because they told us they didn't want us going over there unless we had to be there. So it allowed me to be down here to get the brewery open. And it also allowed, as far as financing goes, big thing. I get asked a lot, why Bennington? I grew up in Manchester. I grew up in Dorset, really, but Manchester, Dorset area. And I have a lot of answers to that. This is what I like about Bennington is it's just a town full of real people, real Vermonters, whether or not you were born here or not, but everybody here seems to get it. We do have the tourists, but they don't seem to be the same tourists that we get up there. So it's just a much, much nicer place to be. The other question I got a lot was, why are you opening a brewery a block down the street from another brewery, and also another brewery over here on the corner, Harvest? I said, well, that's because that's how it's done. Why is there a Stewart's and Cumberland Farms on every corner? Why is there a strip of auto sales places up and down the street? It's just, it brings everybody here, and that's when I was looking at Bennington. At the time, we had Northshire still, we had Harvest, we have Madison's, we have the distillery opening up, we have a cidery opening up. Manchester has nothing. I would have been the first brewery in Manchester, and I know personally, and then also people that beer tourism is a huge market in this state. I used to know the numbers, but I don't know them off the top of my head anymore. But it's a big number. It would surprise you. And when beer tourists come to Vermont and they look at the map and they look at a place that only has one brewery, and then they look at a place that has 3 plus a distillery plus a cidery, they go, well, let's come here. And that happens. And we've been seeing it here. We get a lot of that. We get a lot of people that come to our place, and then they head down the street to Madison's, or if Harvest is open, they'll head down the street to Sean's place. And it's just, I think we're creating a great thing here. My other reason for Bennington was the Putnam block. And when I walked into that corner, we had looked at other places in Bennington. When I walked into that corner space that I have, it took me about 30 seconds when I walked in there, and because I knew the location was perfect, but then the building itself was perfect. And it wasn't until we were about halfway through the build out that I realized, well, I knew the whole project of what was going on in the Putnam block, and I knew all that was happening. And then I, for whatever reason, didn't realize this at the beginning. I realized what we were doing on the corner, and just bringing the corner back to life, and bringing downtown back to life. We had 2 weeks ago, it was everybody was dropping off the freshmen at Bennington College, so all the parents were in town with their kids and all that. And actually there was Omar Ansari, who is the owner of Surly Brewing Company out in Minnesota, which is a giant brewing company out west. He came into the brewery and introduced himself and all that. And later on that evening, my wife and I went over to 421 for dinner, and we were sitting on the street, and actually he had come over and was there, and I was seeing people that had been in our brewery walking up and down Main Street. I think this was like a Wednesday or Thursday night, and I was like, this is really neat. You know, all these people have never been here before, never been to Bennington, never seen it, and look at what's going on. You know, so it was a good, to me, I felt like it was a good first impression for everybody that was out there, and I just thought that was really neat to see. And then my last reason really is our location in Bennington with the Massachusetts and the Capital District. We have a ton of customers that come up from North Adams and Williamstown, a lot of them. We have regulars that come in almost every day. I passed one on the way out coming over here. He comes up from Williamstown all the time. And they're up here not just for me, they're up here for the rest of the town as well. As far as the breweries go, as far as the brewery itself goes, we are a smaller brewery. We're 4 barrels, which is, for comparison, I believe, like Long Trail is 30 or 40 barrels, 14th Star is 30 barrels. Madison's is 7 barrels, and Harvest, I think he's a barrel and a half. So a barrel is 31 gallons, so I'm making 125 gallons of beer every time I make a batch of beer, and that's about 8 kegs worth of beer. So we're not that big, but we are just big enough to support the taps that I have the 12 taps in the brewery itself. So we're making just enough beer to support selling out of those taps. I don't have any plans of distribution. I will can eventually when things slow down. Right now I don't need to can because we're selling what we need to sell. So when things slow down this winter, like they will in January, I'll probably start doing some canning and selling that out the door. The other part that I look at is there was a question on the Brewers Association forum. Somebody put out there, what's your tap room's mission statement? And I went, well, we don't really have one, but I've always in the back of my mind, a very long time ago, I heard a quote from Bill Graham, the famous music promoter, not the preacher, but the music promoter. He said, don't give the people what they want, give them what they should want. I remember when I first heard that, I thought, well, that's kind of a jerk thing to say. But the more I thought about it, the more I went, well, that makes a lot of sense. And actually, Henry Ford sort of had a similar thing where he said, well, if I asked, before he produced cars, he said, if I asked people what they wanted, they would tell me faster horses. And I would have never made the car. So I keep that in mind when I'm brewing the beer, because I don't know how much craft beer drinkers we have in the room, but craft beer right now everything's about the hazy IPA, everything's about the New England IPA, which really started here with the Alchemist. And I'm not putting anything on, saying anything bad about those beers. They're good beers, but that's what everybody wants. That's what everybody comes in looking for. And I have 2 of them, but I leave the rest of the taps open. I make a diverse selection of beer. So it's fun to either have somebody comes in who, has only ever had Budweiser or Miller or Coors, and they'll come in and they'll ask, they'll say, not really, this is my first time, and I'll ask them, what do you normally drink? And they say Budweiser, whatever, and I'll give them sips of things that, I have a couple of beers that are very close to that, but then I also have beers that will kind of walk you away from that. and I'll try to lead them down a path to show them that the beer world is much bigger than just, you know, Miller, Budweiser, or on the flip side, it's not all about heady topper and hazy IPAs. There's a lot of other stuff going on, and it's fun. That's rewarding to me when I can get somebody to move somewhere. I had a wine drinker come in the other day. She was in with her husband. She said, "I only drink wine." And I said, "Well, here, try this beer." And she went, "Oh, this is good. Let me have one of those." And I said, "I won." So that's what I look for. I think I'm pretty much running down. Does anybody have any idea how to make beer? Has anybody ever done it on the homebrew level? Yep. Quite honestly, if anybody in here has homebrewed before, my system is no different. It's just much, much larger. 5 gallons or 125 gallons versus 5 gallons. So really the process isn't any different. But as far as the basics of making beer, if you can make a cup of coffee, you understand the basics of how to make a beer. You take the malted grains, you put hot water in it, you let it sit for a little while, which in this process takes the sugars out, and then you boil it, and you add the hops or whatever at that point. Then you cool it down, and that goes into the fermenters, and then you throw yeast in there. The yeast eat all the sugar, and yeast eat sugar and poop out carbon dioxide and alcohol. So that's the basics of the process right there. Some beers, most of my beers, ales, take anywhere from 10 days to 2 weeks. And lagers, I have a couple on right now. Those beers take anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks to make. So it's a constant process of which beers am I running out of. I'm always thinking a month to 2 months in advance of where am I at, what am I brewing, you know, next, what am I brewing this week. I've got myself down to where I'm only brewing once a week, which before was, I was brewing a lot more before, so trying not to kill myself. I worked more in the last 8 months than I worked, you know, the last 15 years of my career in the military. So. But it's all worth it. My brother works as a contractor, and he put it, nailed it. He said, it was great working for yourself because the harder you work, the more of it comes back to you, rather than, you know, the harder you work and it goes to benefit somebody else. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm more than happy about it. So I'm happy to be here in this town. Anybody got any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Are you gonna start making sours at any point?
I have a Berliner Weiss right now.
Oh, do you?
I do have to not bore everybody else, but my sours would be kettle sours. I can't do a real sour just because that's dangerous as far as the rest of my beers go. But yeah, I do have a Berliner Weiss on right now.
Can you
Yep.
explain what a sour is?
Okay, so there is, let's say normal beer, or clean beer is what we call it, really. Clean beer is made with yeast that's clean, really. It's not going to give off any sort of off flavors or anything like that. Sour beers are made with, we call them bugs. They're made with a lactobacillus or a whole bunch of other stuff that as it's in the beer, it creates a souring effect on the beer, and they become. And I think sour is the wrong word for it. I think tart is a better description. They're tart. They've got that sour tartness to them, and a lot of them are actually highly carbonated and low in alcohol. In fact, that's the Berliner Weiss that I have. So they're actually, as far as the summertime beer goes, they're really actually very refreshing beer. And we actually have fruit syrups that you can put into the Berliner Weiss that we have, which actually doesn't make it sweet. It cuts the sourness of the beer, so it makes it balanced.
Where do you get, I'm not a beer drinker, but I'm going to come and you can give me one and you can convert me. But where do you, grain or whatever it is that you do, where do you get it? And do you have to contract with farmers? And then if you have a whole bunch of breweries, do you guys run out of stuff?
Not yet.
Is there, okay.
Not yet. As far as supply chain goes right now, I haven't seen any issues. I had a little bit of issue getting yeast about a month ago, but I did get some in. I personally use, there are a couple of large companies. Country Malt Group is who I use. The other one is BSG. I don't know what BSG stands for. And they are large companies that feed all of the breweries in the country. There are 8,000 plus breweries in the country. So you sign up with Country Malt and you go on their website and it's like going on Amazon, and you click down and you say, I need this, this, and this. And they have warehouses all over the country. And the warehouse that my stuff comes out of is up in Plattsburgh, New York. So I've actually, the reason I selected them was because I went, if I ever need something right now, I can get in the car and drive to Plattsburgh. Well, I had to get in the car and drive to Plattsburgh a couple of months ago. So their warehouse is giant. But the grain itself, grain and hops, the grain itself, a lot of it is grown out west, Midwest. And actually there's a lot grown in Canada as well. So that's where a lot of that comes from. There is a maltster in just south of Burlington. I don't know if you remember driving up Route 7 to Burlington. There's the Dakin Farm or Dakin Farm, big farm over there on the right-hand side. They were bought by Peterson Quality Malts. So they bought that farm, I don't know, 3-4 years ago, and they are now producing malt in Vermont. I believe a lot of it is actually grown in Vermont as well. I've yet to use any of their malt right now because it's just a delivery thing and I don't have time to drive up there. But I would like to eventually make a beer that's all Vermont, Vermont grown stuff. Hops are also grown in Vermont. I don't know if that's where you were going next.
No, I was going to ask you, is it like wine? So if a grape is grown here, this is her territory. If a grape is grown here, it's going to taste different from a grape grown here. Is it the same with grape?
It 100% is. But that is also where winemakers have an advantage, because winemakers can say, this is our 2019 Cabernet, this is our 2018 Cabernet, and they don't have to taste the same because you're labeling them as different years, because you are using that terroir and you're using that, whatever the grapes did that year. Beer makers don't have that advantage because we're expected to make the same beer every time. And so as the crops change, which I haven't run into yet because I haven't been in business that long, I am going to come into it. The new hop crop will be out soon. But as an example, where I was, there is a hop grower up near Bristol, Vermont, and Champlain Valley Hops is what they're called. They are the largest hop grower in the Northeast. All right, they're the largest hop grower in the Northeast. They have 33 acres versus Oregon with 30,000 acres. Yeah. So, and Washington State with about the same. So, just to, the hops in the Northeast, hops were always grown in the Northeast. Prior to Prohibition, we had hop farms all over the Northeast because it's the latitude, it's that 42nd, North 42, that latitude is where hops grow well. So that's also why New Zealand is a great hop growing region, because they're the opposite of us. They're South 42. And prior to Prohibition, there were hops grown all over the place here. Prohibition killed it, and then they had a blight that also killed the stuff off. But you will find, and in fact, I have a friend of mine I used a couple of years ago. He had wild hops growing in his backyard. And it was kind of neat because we picked some, and I made a beer with him on homebrew, but it didn't come out very good. But it was just neat because you could imagine that hop plant had been growing there for 100 years. It had been left over from when we used to make grow hops here. So, yes, sir.
When I was a kid in Albany, they had 5 or 6 breweries, big ones, and every fall they came out with a Bock beer.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly is a Bock beer, and why in the fall?
They probably did it in the fall. You have the Oktoberfest beers, which are really Märzen's, or they're actually not Märzen's, but a lot of them are. Bock is going to be the same idea. It's the same sort of beer. It's a lager, and it's German. So I'm assuming that's why they were coming out when they did. I don't know if that answered your question all the way, but that's just my guess.
So actually a Bock is just a lager?
A Bock is a lager, yeah.
Tell me if I'm wrong, and I probably am, but My recollection of the Bach beer was in the fall, they had to clean all the equipment. It came out darker.
No. Go clean it all the time.
Yeah. If you're cleaning, if whatever's in your equipment is, and because it's not clean, is getting in your beer, then you're making sour beer. Is what you're doing,
That's
yeah.
some fun.
Yeah.
Are you part of any of the beer trail promotions?
Yeah, yeah. In fact, actually, this month is the Southern Vermont Beer Trail. So we actually, it just started on Monday. So we actually have flyers up in the brewery where you can come in and you can take a picture of the QR code and be entered in for the Vermont Brewers Association for like a Yeti cooler or something like that, so.
Hopefully that's a conveyor belt to bring people in.
Yeah, yeah. The Vermont Brewers Association does a good job of those kind of promotions, getting that word out there.
Yeah, a quick question about, for IPAs. I've never understood the appeal. I always felt I was like stabbing myself with a fork every time I drank one. Sorry, my favorite has always been porters and stouts. Are you doing anything in that vein?
I have, right now, I have a coffee stout on. I had an oatmeal stout and I had a porter. Those ran out about midsummer and they don't sell as well in the summer, so I
Right, sure.
kind of let that go for a little bit, but I brewed the coffee stout a couple weeks ago. The homebrew fest that was here a couple weeks ago, when Will's a good friend of mine, so and I had actually done the homebrew fest myself 6 or 7 times at least, and I told him when you do it again, for the next summer, I said I'm not sure if I can sponsor you financially, because at that time we hadn't even opened. I said, but I will say that whoever is the winning beer, I will brew they can come here and I'll brew the beer for them. And I made a joke about, as long as it's not some, stout made with peanut butter fluff and everything else. But you know what won? It was a peanut butter fluff stout. And I actually went over there and I actually remember trying that beer, and it really wasn't that, it was actually pretty good beer. So I will have a peanut butter fluff stout out probably sometime in November.
Oh my gosh.
I learned, I was in Germany this last 2 weeks ago, and I learned that the regions make a big difference on that. And you're thinking Oktoberfest and all that, but if you get in southern Germany, it's a light beer that, they just pour it like water.
Yeah, and that all comes from the water, actually. It's not so much anymore, because now you can make your water whatever you want it to be, and they didn't understand. We're talking, 1800s. They didn't understand that the water was what was making their beer the way it was. They just knew that this style beer in this region worked great, whereas if we tried to make this kind of beer with the water that we have, it doesn't work. And that's where you get all of these different regions in Germany and actually all throughout Europe. And it all comes down to what was in the water that they were using, which they didn't know at the time.
Heidelberg's close to the Rhine, I assume they're pumping it out of there.
Yeah. But actually, the water here in Bennington is really good for brewing because there's nothing in it. So there's, they use chlorine.
Yeah.
They use chlorine, but chlorine's easy to get rid of. And then the rest of it is I just add whatever I want. I don't have to compensate for different stuff.
Interesting.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank
we'll
you.
all make sure we